and I hope they are both listening carefully. West Australians are waking up every day sad, anxious and depressed because politicians are using a health policy to mandate a drug for every citizen in this country. The politicians say this is a choice, but when people are coerced with human rights to take a drug, this is no longer free and informed consent. It is forced medication. So politicians are either openly lying to the public or they are deceiving themselves that this COVID injection is a choice for every Australian. In which case, to quote our Premier Mark McGowan, they need to grow a brain. Either way, politicians are violating every health act in Australia with this mandate because there is no law to support coercion with any vaccine in the Australian population. This is because there is no valid public health purpose for coercing anyone with a vaccine. Vaccines have always been a choice, and they are a secondary measure in controlling the risk of infectious diseases. They are not a primary measure of control. So currently, all Australian politicians are violating Australia's health laws. They are violating every international human rights covenant, including experimentation on the population, which comes under the Nuremberg Code.
Charge them! Charge them!
And Australia has ratified these covenants and pretended to be a democratic country for the last 10 years. And every doctor in this country is violating their own medical ethical guidelines to support the government's alleged health policy instead of their patients' best interests. This is a medical tyranny that is being held together by the Australian Health Practitioners Regulatory Authority, APRA, the regulatory board for all doctors. This board is headed by an individual that does not have a medical degree and has removed the autonomy of doctors to speak openly on the medical literature. This led to a situation on Saturday where 6,000 West Australians turned up in Forest Place to voice their concerns on this tyranny, this medical tyranny, and West Australia's Premier, Mark McGowan, showed his contempt for the citizens of this state by simply saying they should grow a brain.
Shame on him.
I'd like to say that this is a new low for this country, but it is not. It has been happening for over 10 years. As parents and grandparents, as you see here today, have attempted to discuss their concerns about vaccine risks, that is, concerns about children's health, and we have been rudely and emotionally dismissed by public health officials in the mainstream media as anti-vaxxers, another label. Bullying, intimidation by our public health authorities using the West Australian, the worst Australian, actually. This is how you remove the public's voice from the political arena, and it is the result of powerful industry lobby groups in this country, such as Dick Smith's Australian Skeptics, a non-scientific organisation that educates the public on this issue with industry-funded scientists. And they are influencing every media outlet and industry-funded university and conference in this country. This is called astroturfing, something I had no idea about before I went to university to research children's health. It is the indoctrination of the public by groups pretending to be grassroots consumer groups, but in fact they are promoting industry-funded science, in this case pseudoscience, completely unsupported by scientific evidence. To journalists, to politicians, whilst claiming that they are doing the opposite, exposing the pseudoscience to the public. And they are working with our 100% industry-funded regulator of drugs, the Therapeutic Goods Administrator that parades itself as a government body, is 100% funded by the pharmaceutical companies, who have never once set up an active surveillance system for adverse events for vaccines in the last 70 years. And that's why they don't have the evidence to claim these injections are safe. They are doing it without the evidence.
Failure!
And they are working with a pharma-funded mainstream media and peer-reviewed journals that are also owned by the pharmaceutical companies. That is the state of science in the 21st century. So, George Orwell's Animal Farm with lies and doublespeak is truly here, and it was not the result of communism in this country. It has been the result of the neoliberalist right wing of the Liberal government that has led Australia for the last 7 years since Tony Abbott got into power, in collaboration with Labor and the Greens, who have also been bought by the donations and lobbying system of our political system. Hence the need for the media to portray our rallies as being caused by extreme right-wing neo-Nazis, whom they plant in the audience for that specific purpose. Instead of the average parent and grandparent that you can see around you today that is brave enough to stand up for the future of our children. How evil is the farmer-funded media?
Disgraceful.
For a decade, the mainstream media, specifically the worst, the West Australian, has indoctrinated you with emotional and derogatory comments about anyone who speaks about the risks of vaccines, and that includes academics and medical practitioners.
Shame on them.
These strategies are also being used on our doctors when they speak up to keep them quiet. So this is why Mark McGowan knew he was safe, to show contempt for the citizens of Australia by telling them to grow a brain, instead of discussing our concerns as parents of these children.
Shame on McGowan.
He knew he would be protected by the media, as there was no independent media to give the public a voice on this issue. Well, here we are today, guys. This is our media. He can frame this as, we are saving lives. That's why you need to grow a brain, is what he said. And when in fact the opposite is true. And all governments, and this is what all governments are doing with these COVID policies. This is a classic example of George Orwell's doublespeak that is being used to control the population globally by a media which is fully funded by the pharmaceutical interests. Let me show you how 30 years of indoctrination can lead to the public believing that there is a magical drug called a vaccine that does not have any serious side effects in a genetically diverse population.
And it doesn't work.
There is no drug that does not have serious side effects in the population. So how have we arrived at this point? In 1986, the pharmaceutical companies were paying out millions of dollars in compensation for the vaccine injuries they were causing, with just a handful of vaccines at the time, and the deaths that they were causing in children with these vaccines. But in the US, they went to the US Congress and they requested indemnity for any drug that they called a vaccine, because they said They were life-saving products that we cannot live without.
Rubbish.
So there was the massive lie that allowed all doctors to be promoting a drug against their own medical ethical guidelines and their own principles of medicine, as they are now required to promote government vaccination policies instead of the patient's best interests. And this has been happening for 30 years.
Hear, hear.
From 1986 onwards, Big Pharma did not need to provide evidence of either the safety or the efficacy of vaccines. So many new vaccines were introduced to the program over this time. As you can see, from our day, anyone over 30, that's 3 times as many vaccines listed on this program, none of which were used to reduce the risk of infectious diseases, but it's the mainstream media that controls this narrative. So,
Shame on the media.
So, to convince you of their efficacy and safety, the medical industry introduced a new word called vaccine preventable diseases. So now they didn't have to convince you with evidence, they just started calling them vaccine preventable diseases instead of infectious diseases from 1990 onwards.
Marketing.
And then we use another word for anyone that talks about the risks or the ingredients. We use the word anti-vaxxer. Okay, so, and it's very derogative and it gives a stigma to people as if they haven't researched the topic and they're simply dismissing a beneficial drug. That is the intimidation and bullying and the labelling of words that have been used to convince you that there is a drug that has no serious side effects when you inject it into the body. Now this is also done. See, even now doctors are being taught to use the word anti-vaxxer, and you'll notice that as soon as you start talking about the risks of a vaccine or ingredients, they'll say to you, oh, that's anti-vaccination material. Dismissing scientific arguments with a label, a derogatory label that the media has used for 30 years to denigrate people that are parents who are concerned about their children's health. And conspiracy theory, doctors are even using these words as well, and we thought they were the intelligent part of the population. So this is the situation we have today. And remember that the doctor's education is funded by Big Pharma, as are the peer-reviewed journals. So the actual peer-reviewed system is broken, and the public is being educated with ignorance about the safety and efficacy of vaccines by pseudoscience presented by Big Pharma media. So, Mr. Scott Morrison introduced coercive vaccination into the children's program in 2015, but he didn't do that through the Health Act. He did that through social services departments. This is why he didn't have to produce scientific evidence to prove that the no jab, no pay policies were for a legitimate public health purpose. Coercion with a vaccine is not necessary and never has been throughout history. It has always been a choice. And this is why he can still claim to the public that vaccines are not compulsory in this country, because they are not validated with a law in any health act in this country. So all of these mandates being provided to you by the government are unlawful. You do not have to abide by them, and we are going to get them removed. And let me give you a bit more double speak, and beware of it now that I've told you about it. Mr. Scott Morrison implemented this program, the No Jab, No Pay, in 2015 and called it Choices for Families. And he is removing the choice of educated parents to choose how many vaccines they use in their children. This has never been about anti-vaccination. It has always been about choice. as they've added more and more vaccines to this program. And these drugs, don't forget, are injected directly into an infant's bloodstream, not just from the first day of life now, but tragedy of tragedies in pregnancy. And the reason they do that is so that there will be no comparison between a truly unvaccinated population.
Evil.
And another double speak. And then they labelled the National Immunisation Program the catch-up schedule. It's not a catch-up schedule. No adults have had 16 vaccines to live in this society. You know, we need to start thinking, and Mike McGowan needs to grow a brain. And on top of that, as if that's not bad enough, they have stolen our children. They have reduced the age of consent to a drug to 12 years of age.
Evil government.
Our children are now prey for the pharmaceutical companies' false advertising that is being provided by medical doctors who are hiding behind a corrupt medical board.
Shame.
So again, as a parent, I say, what a crime, and in Mark McGowan's own words, I am asking him to grow a brain and a backbone, and to listen carefully.
McGowan's corrupt.
Okay, so it is a criminal offence in Australia, under the Criminal Act, for anyone to be promoting false and misleading health information to the public, because that results in life and death outcomes. And journalists are currently complicit in this, as are doctors, as are politicians, and soon the police will be complicit because they'll be enforcing this false information. And I'll tell you that there is a minimum of 1 year jail sentence attached to this crime. It is time for parents to take control of their children, and reducing the age of a child to give consent to a drug or vaccine, which is a drug, to 12 years of age is a criminal and evil action. And no parent was consulted on this policy.
Exactly.
Mark McGowan's West Australian government is currently terrorising West Australians with a mandatory COVID injection
Shame on
to
McGowan.
participate in society and to live a functional life, and he is doing this based on fraudulent science presented by a chief health officer that is pushing industry science. It is as simple as that.
It's a crime.
This is a crime, and I am recommending that any parent who does not agree with this policy refuse to send your children to school until this age is changed. As of now. The schools are not a safe place anymore. They have taken over the role of promoting this farmer-funded science to our children, even in the curriculum. So the health departments are using the schools as a place to indoctrinate the children about vaccines, as all of you have been for the last 30 years. So parents, you are not powerless. Remove your children from the school system until our concerns are heard and addressed. And all businesses, organisations and institutions, like parents in West Australia, do not be frightened of the fines that the government is threatening or the loss of your jobs. They are unlawful and they will not hold up in court. Clog up the court. Ignore the fines, and it is the duty of every West Australian, in the interest of community health and safety, to go on strike until all mandatory COVID injection directives have been removed in this state. They not law, and every directive to control the alleged COVID pandemic in 2020 will make you sicker, not healthier. And these directives, including the fraudulent testing of healthy people,
PCR fraud.
Yeah, fake test doesn't work, get rid of it. Fake numbers.
to get a case of disease, right, next time you hear the word case of disease in the mainstream media, ask them what symptoms these people have. And if they say no symptoms, they were healthy, they just took a test, or if they say, oh, they had minor flu-like symptoms, a cough and a cold, none of those things are valid to call a case of COVID, because the PCR test doesn't test for COVID. It doesn't diagnose disease. It identifies one strain of a virus, if you're lucky, if it's actually used properly, under 20 cycles threshold. But in Australia, we've been using it 40 to 45 cycle threshold, and that's known to be potentially 100% false positive. So you have a government that can manipulate this test to find a case whenever they want and close a border whenever they want. And the whole pandemic was based on false, fraudulent pandemic modelling, which they've since dumped because it didn't use real data. That's why you're not seeing a pandemic. There's no real data for this.
Oh, the footy grand final.
Yep.
And healthy people have never been called a case of disease in history to control an infectious disease prior to 2020. So we need to get rid of all these fraudulent directives and go back to the way in which you control infectious diseases. In fact, it is the testing of healthy people to create a case of this disease and to lock you up for 2 weeks that is the cause of this pandemic. Don't let yourself get tested, and don't get QR coded so that they can claim somebody walked past you that didn't have any symptoms but they were identified positive, and the next minute you're in quarantine. Stop doing it.
They call us crazy.
Spread the fear.
So, everyone using these directives will harm your health, so you have a real reason not to do them. You don't want to become sick, and every one of these directives will make you sicker. This is not a health policy, it is a sickness policy, being falsely promoted to the public. And we know this because as the vaccination program expanded in every country, the statistics show that children became significantly sicker with chronic illnesses and death as each new vaccine was added to this program. These programs are not promoted to you on health outcomes. They're promoted to you on labels. And let me tell you how they promote vaccination programs to you. They make you feel guilty. It is your duty to take this injection for the good of the community. Even though they have never provided any evidence to show that a vaccine can create herd immunity. They don't have to do that to get that listed on the vaccination program, and that is stated by Terry Nolan, who was the advisor of our TAGI Vaccine Advisory Board for 10 years. He stated that in 2010. They are not providing evidence of safety and efficacy. They are using heavily laden labels. The word vaccine, that's why people are walking into their own deaths and illnesses. You think there's a drug that doesn't have side effects? Your doctors have cognitive dissonance because they're being paid highly to believe this, and they know they'll lose those jobs. So in 2021, I have heard more sirens than I have ever heard in the alleged pandemic of 2020 in this city. And miscarriages and stillbirths are being reported at the highest numbers ever after the injection of the COVID injection and other vaccines in inverted commas. But the media doesn't report these things. And if the media doesn't report side effects, then you think there's a drug that has no side effects. There are hundreds of thousands of people being admitted to hospital and dying presently who have had the COVID injection, and the media's not reporting them.
They don't care. Shame on the media.
This is leading to people walking into their own deaths and illnesses, and that includes doctors and nurses because of the indoctrination. So, another thing, there is no transparency in the statistics you're provided with. They're coming directly from Big Pharma and from a medical system where they don't have to prove that the person died of a particular disease. And death diagnosis is a grey area of science. People normally die with at least 3 or 4 comorbidities, and it's up to the doctor to decide what that is.
Yep.
So getting statistics of deaths and hospitalisations in a mainstream media that's funded by Big Pharma tells you nothing. You need the medical context of what those people had and what drugs they had been given as well, not to mention the vaccines, which state these cause flu-like symptoms and neurological damage on the package inserts. You are being played.
Yep.
So, Mr McGowan, the TGA has stated that this injection will not prevent anyone from getting COVID, and it will not prevent the transmission of the disease in the community. So is this a vaccine? No, this is a drug, and it's an untested drug. There is no reason for any employer to mandate this drug in the population, particularly as the TGA itself has said it's only provisionally approved because they haven't done the 10 years of long-term studies to determine a risk-benefit analysis.
Shame.
The media uses the word rare. How do they know it's rare when the drug's only been in the population for 6 months? You don't know it's rare. So I say to you, what if this is an untested, genetically engineered drug, as the lawyers have described, that you are enforcing on every citizen without any scientific justification? And to every employer who holds no liability for these policies, for every employer who holds liability for these policies, you better think twice about enforcing this on your employees. Because there is overwhelming evidence of the risk provided by global regulators already in just 10 months of use.
Yep.
So this would make it a sickness policy, not a health policy. And anyone with a brain can see that this would be the biggest crime against the population ever committed.
Yeah, here.
And Mr McGowan and our Governor, Kim Beazley, will be complicit in this crime, as will all the doctors.
Shame on him.
So, I am calling on everyone in Western Australia to stop complying with every COVID directive until Mark McGowan and his Chief Health Officer have had an open scientific discussion of this policy with myself. No more lockdowns in Western Australia. We will not comply. I am also calling on everyone in Western Australia to stop, I am also calling for concerned parents to remove their children from schools until the age of a child and the indoctrination they are receiving in the school curriculums is addressed. You didn't sign your children into those schools to be indoctrinated with drugs.
No.
And to every citizen of West Australia, I want you to take time off work to support your colleagues who are currently being threatened with the loss of their jobs for not taking an unlawful and unproven medical injection. And whilst you take leave from work, have a bit of a holiday while you do it. Everyone must write to the Governor of Western Australia, Kim Beazley, and request that the Premier and all West Australian politicians are removed from their positions immediately because of their open contempt for the citizens of Western Australia who they were voted in to serve, and because of the unlawful implementation of policies on health that have no scientific basis and will destroy human health.
Hear, hear.
So, to sum up, there will be no more compliance of COVID directives in Western Australia as of today until this is addressed, and doctors must start abiding by their medical ethics, or they will be tried for complicity in this biggest crime that has ever been committed against humanity.
Judy has just handed me the microphone and I intend to speak. Right, buy her book. Buy her book every day and give it to somebody. Give it to a politician. Give it to one of these journalists here who are presently grovelling to Big Pharma. Buy Judy Wilyman's book.
Okay, thanks everyone. Can you please give a round of applause for Dr. Judy Wilyman. Great speech tonight. Thank you.